life. But what if the person living right next door had been quietly watching you, tracking your every move, and hiding a disturbing secret you could never have imagined? That's exactly what happened to me. And trust me, you won't believe how this all went down. I live in a quiet, middle-class, suburban neighborhood. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names. The streets are lined with tall, leafy trees, and there's a row of colorful flower beds outside nearly every house. It's the kind of place you would expect to feel safe, calm, almost too perfect. The kids ride their bikes up and down the sidewalk, laughing as they play games. People walk their dogs in the early mornings, exchanging friendly nods, and you can hear the distant hum of lawnmowers in the summer heat. It's peaceful. It's a place that feels like it's stuck in time. At least, that's what I thought. But that was before I met Jake, my neighbor. He seemed normal enough at first, polite, friendly, just a little on the quieter side. He was the kind of guy who would wave at you from his porch, but would never make much small talk. He always kept to himself, but I didn't think much of it. Not everyone needs to be the life of the party, right? I figured he was just a private person. But then things started changing. It all started so small, so seemingly innocent. Like any other day, I came home from work one evening, tired but ready to unwind. The sun was dipping behind the horizon, casting an orange glow that stretched across the sky. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Jake standing at his window, staring out into the street. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe he was just lost in thought or watching the sunset like anyone would. People stand by their windows all the time. It wasn't a big deal, right? But there was something about the way he was standing. His posture was so still, so unnatural, as though he was waiting for something. His face was angled slightly toward the street, but his eyes, they were locked on me. And that's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He didn't wave or greet me. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. He just stood there, his eyes unblinking, following me as I walked toward my front door. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, so I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just one of those weird moments where someone's caught in a daydream. But when I came home the next day, he was there again. Same spot, same posture. His eyes locked on me, without even the slightest change in expression. This wasn't normal. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that I was overreacting. But the unease settled in. It was a feeling that lingered in my chest like a weight. Every time I pulled into my driveway, there he was, watching, silent. And with each passing day, it grew harder to shake the feeling that I was being observed. One evening, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. It was a warm evening, with a light breeze rustling the leaves in the trees. The kind of evening that makes you feel like the world is still, like time has slowed down just for a moment. As I walked around the block, I kept my head down, enjoying the simplicity of it all. But as I turned the corner onto the next street, I saw him again. Jake. He was standing by his fence, just like before, staring out into the street, as if waiting for me to walk by. My heart skipped a beat. This time, I waved at him, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this was all in my head. But he didn't wave back. He didn't even acknowledge me. His eyes never left me as I passed by. It felt like I was walking through a fog, like I couldn't escape the sensation that I was being trapped in his gaze. I tried to shake it off, but something about the moment felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something wasn't right. I continued my walk, but the air around me felt thick, like I wasn't alone. Every step I took, I could feel his eyes on me. It was like I had become part of his world, and now there was no escaping it. Later that week, I decided to head to the grocery store. It was something I did every few days, nothing out of the ordinary. The store wasn't far, just a short drive down the road, and it was always packed with people doing their weekly shopping. As I walked down the aisles, reaching for some cereal, I looked up, and there, at the other end of the aisle, was Jake. My heart dropped. He was standing there, his back slightly turned, but his eyes were fixed directly on me. He wasn't looking at the shelves or the products on them. He wasn't even pretending to be interested in the items around him. No, he was watching me. I froze for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. Should I pretend I hadn't seen him? Should I acknowledge him? I felt my stomach twist into knots. But before I could even react, Jake turned around and walked in the opposite direction. He didn't look back, but I could still feel the weight of his stare on my skin. I was shaken, more than I wanted to admit. It couldn't have been a coincidence. I had never seen him at the store before. I didn't even know if he lived in that area. It was too strange. He had been waiting for me. But then, things got even weirder. One afternoon, I decided to take a break from work and head to the park, hoping that the fresh air would help clear my mind. The park was just a few blocks away from my house, and it was usually pretty quiet, with only a few people walking their dogs or sitting on the benches. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering as I walked along the winding path. The sound of birds singing filled the air, and I breathed in deeply, hoping the calm atmosphere would help me relax. But then, as I turned the corner, I saw him again. Jake. He was sitting on a bench near the walking path, just staring off into the distance. He didn't have a book or any kind of distraction. He was just sitting there, completely still, his eyes locked on me as soon as I came into view. The air around me seemed to shift, and I felt that familiar sense of dread creep up my spine. It was as if time had stopped, and for a moment, the world had narrowed down to just me and him. I tried not to let my panic show. I kept walking, pretending that nothing was wrong, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I could feel his eyes on me, following every step, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I quickened my pace, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. I turned the corner and kept walking, but I couldn't escape the sense that he was still there, observing me. When I got back home, I locked the door behind me, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. The house felt too quiet, too empty. I wanted to shake the feeling, but it was like a constant hum in the back of my mind, like I was being hunted. It wasn't long before I realized that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I had to confront him. I had to know the truth. So, one evening, when the neighborhood was quiet, I made up my mind. I walked to Jake's house. My heart was racing. My thoughts were a whirlwind of panic, but I knew I couldn't back down. This had to end. When I knocked on his door, he opened it almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for me. His face was calm, too calm. His eyes had that unsettling glint, like he knew something I didn't. He didn't seem surprised or confused. No, it was like this moment had been planned all along. "Jake," I said, my voice shaking, "we need to talk. Why have you been watching me? Why are you following me everywhere I go?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped aside and motioned for me to come inside. There was something in his eyes that told me I had no choice. Hesitant, I stepped over the threshold into his home. The moment I entered, I was hit by an overpowering scent. Dust, old wood, something faintly sour. The dim lighting made the entire place feel off-kilter, as if the world inside this house wasn't quite real. The walls were covered with photographs, but they weren't just random pictures. They were mine. I took a step closer, my breath catching in my throat. The photographs were of me, images of me walking my dog, sitting on my porch, standing in my yard, coming out of my car. There were pictures from angles I never even realized anyone could capture. Some were taken from across the street. Some were taken from the shadows of nearby trees. It felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a web of images, trapped in a life that wasn't even mine anymore. Jake's eyes never left me as he spoke softly, almost kindly. "I've been keeping you safe," he said, his voice steady. "You don't understand, but you were always there. Always the same, even when everything else was changing. I had to watch over you. I had to make sure you were safe." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The person I had thought was just a quiet neighbor had turned into something much darker. I didn't stay any longer. I turned and bolted out of that house, the images of the photographs burning into my mind. I ran back to my own house, my legs moving faster than I ever thought possible. And now, even months later, I can't escape it. The feeling that I'm still being watched. The feeling that I'm still trapped in someone's obsession. Maybe it's not over. Maybe it's just begun. If you think you're safe in your own neighborhood, think again. There are no guarantees. And sometimes, the person you least expect might be the one keeping you under their watchful eye. If you found this story unsettling, don't forget to subscribe and check out our next video. You never know when someone may be watching you too.